There was once a family of potters. There was grandfather, his son, daughter-in-law and granddaughter. The grandfather had been a potter since he was a young man. He carried clay from the hillside to make his wonderful pots out of. He fetched wood to stoke the kiln and mixed beautiful glazes. And he taught his son all of these skills as the son grew up. And when he married, the daughter-in-law was also taught the same skills. They were good. But the grandfather got old and was no longer strong enough to dig and fetch clay from the hillside, and his back hurt too much to bend and stoke the kiln with the wood. So he spent his time working with his granddaughter, helping her hands shape the pots as she treadled the wheel, showing her how to mix glazes, and telling her stories that sometimes influenced her pottery. He might say, there was a brilliant ship with flags flying that set off to the ocean, and she would make an oval pot with bands of colour down the side like the flags of the ship. Or he might say, there was a tiny bird building a nest in spring, and she would make a delicate bowl the colour of eggshells. But eventually his hands began to shake a bit too much even to help her shape the bowls. And he spent his time sitting there in the workshop where he spent his life. And he would say to his son sometimes, "Are you getting the kiln hot enough? Are you mixing the glazes?" And his son would say to him, "Father, I've been doing it for years. You can't treat me like a child." And his daughter-in-law would say, "You could sit in the house, you know. You would be better off there, because here you come in with your cane and you sometimes break things." And so the old man went to sit in the house during the day, feeling lonely. At evening time, they all came in and sat around the table for the evening meal. And grandfather, wanting to know about the business that had been his whole life, would ask them questions about how the business was doing, whether they were getting the clay the right consistency, whether glaze is good. And he was concerned to hear that the business hadn't been doing so well. And his son would say, Father, just leave it. We can manage the business." But evening after evening, the questions went on. "Can I show you how to make the pots a bit better? Get the temperature of the kiln better?" "Father, leave it." And his daughter-in-law looked at him and said, "I wish you'd give as much attention to the way you eat as to the way we manage the business. Look, you're spilling food down your front." And the old man looked at his shirt, and there were stains of food down it, as his spoon shook when he took it to his mouth. And she said, "They won't come out of your shirt or the tablecloth." The old man picked up his dish and his cane, and he went pottering off to sit in a chair in his corner. The granddaughter got up to go and sit near him. "You sit back at the table," said her father. "You sit back there. And you're not working so hard. Your pots are not selling anywhere near like they used to." "I need grandfather's beautiful stories to make beautiful pots," said his daughter. "Nonsense," said the father, smacking the table. And so it went on. Evening meals, grandfather sitting in his corner with his bowl shaking, and sometimes the bowl slipped out of his hand and broke on the floor. "We can't afford to keep making bowls for you to break," said the daughter-in-law. And one day, an evening or two later, she came back. "I've been to the market," she said. And in her hand she was holding a wooden bowl. "Look," she said, "you won't break this when you drop it on the floor. You can use this now." And the granddaughter, looked at the bowl, said, "Can I borrow it for a few minutes, grandfather?" And he looked just sadly there with his tears in his eyes. And she took the wooden bowl and she went out to the pottery and found a knife. she found a block of wood and she went back indoors and she started whittling the wood into a shape, looking at the bowl as she sat there. And her father, getting ready for the evening meal, went over and said, "Oh, you're going to take up wood carving now instead of pottery?" in a joking kind of tone. "Well," said the granddaughter, she said, "I thought I would practice making wooden bowls so that I would have wooden bowls for you and Mother when you're old and sitting in a corner." Her father and mother looked at each other in shocked silence. They had tears in their eyes. They apologised to their grandfather. They reinstated him at the evening table, and in the day he went back out to the pottery. Sometimes he dozed in his chair, and sometimes he told his granddaughter more stories about a big green dragon with wide wings, and she created a beautiful shining green pot with wide handles, or a tall slender princess with sparkling eyes, and she would create a beautiful tall vase that sparkled in the sunlight. And so life continued much more happily for a few years, although not without its cares.